Hi, Jack. How you doing?
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Hi, pretty good.
Good.
So I know both of you pretty well because I've been watching the Atheist Experience for many years.
So you know us pretty well.
Co-host. I'm a Canadian as well, so it's nice to talk to another Canuck. So I'll get straight to my point.
Okay.
So basically, I believe that God does provide evidence for, and I'm just going to use his because it's simpler, but you know, there's feminine and masculine sides to God. But anyway, I'm going to say his. But so basically, my grandparents on my mom's side.
No. Sorry. Before you go into your story, can you clarify what you're going to do?
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about synchronicities and ways in which coincidences in our lives can point to bigger truths.
So coincidences have you convinced that a God exists?
Well, interesting coincidences. I'm not talking about like my brother and I have the same birthday or something. You know what I mean? Like I'm not.
Who gets to decide what's interesting?
Minor stuff like that. Well, I'll explain it, and you can tell me whether or not it's meaningful.
Sure. Let's hear you out. What's up?
Okay. So basically, my mom lost both her parents within about 3 months due to really extreme aggressive forms of cancer. And it caused a lot of grief for her, and she actually left the church for a while. She was a Christian and Catholic. Well, she kind of was like, she didn't love Catholicism, but she believed in God. And she hated God for a long time, right? And she would always go to like her parents' graves to pray and talk to them. And well, they died in 94. In 2004, my dad got a job in California, and we got the chance to move to California, which is every Canadian's dream. So we took it. And my mom was really like praying as to whether or not this was a good thing. And she talked to her parents about it and said, please give me a sign. I just want to know a sign. Something that this is okay. So maybe a week or two later from that, my dad got our new number, our phone number in Long Beach. The number ended 3435. So okay, that's a easy to remember number. So he tells her, and my mom gets this weird instinct to kind of dig a little bit because there's this weird overgrowth. So she shortly discovers after hearing the number that the grave plots, the entire time, she didn't know the numbers. They were just put there, were 34 and 35. And, you know, it's a 1 in 10,000 chance, like not perfect. You know, I know like a 1 in a million chance would be more impressive. But it was really powerful for her. And it was very healing for her because when she lost her parents, it really, really messed her up for a long time. And she's still, you know, not having parents. And I only really knew my grandparents very little. They were amazing people. And Jack, my grandfather, he would hide quarters in tree stumps and tell us that pirate ships came up the creek. And we believed them, of course.
That's sweet. So, but, Jack, I'm going to stop you for a sec, though.
Pretty quiet, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. It's just we have limited time, and so I don't mean to interrupt you to be rude because you seem like a lovely person. But I do want to say that like if you're posturing this as some sort of proof, I can see why anecdotally a lot of people might look at something like this and it may resonate with them, right? They may say, oh wow, you know, that coincidence has a very strong emotional tie. So when a coincidence has a strong emotional tie like that, people are more prone psychologically to lean into it, right? Because they feel a connection. So, but when you're positing that,
Jack, please listen.
Jack, one sec. Sorry, but when you're positing that in a conversation as some sort of proof that should be compelling to somebody else, you have to understand that just couldn't be. Just the fact that you even yourself were able to say, listen, like there's a 1 in 10,000 chance that this would happen. Like coincidences like that happen every day. So I don't understand how you would expect us to draw connections. What about telling me this story made you think that I would go, well, shit, God is real then? What? No one's ever put it to me that way before.
Well, here's the thing. Here's what I realized, right? One thing I realized from all of this, and these happen to me all the time and on a smaller scale, a bigger scale. But what I realized is we're never going to have sufficient evidence as to whether or not God exists. That is
Stop right there. Stop right there. You just said we're never going to have sufficient evidence to believe in a God, why would you keep going?
Perspective.
Why would you keep going?
From the scientific method. From the scientific method is what I'm talking about. We're never going to be able to
do you have a
perform
better
an
method
experiment where we can prove or disprove God, right?
Okay, hold
We
on.
agree with that,
Hold
right?
on. I had something really important to say about the coincidences, because that's really the reason that you called. You have all these coincidences that you say keep happening in your life. Please understand, there are so many words and numbers that are in your life now that have been in your life in the past. Locker numbers, cell phone numbers. Hold on, please listen to me when I'm talking just for a minute, okay? So there are all kinds of words, all kinds of foods, all kinds of emotional words. You know, there's middle names, there's all kinds of things all over your life that can mean something is tied to you because it feels like it is, because you feel like you kind of own those words. They're a part of you. I can understand how that can feel like something is speaking to you. Something is obviously yours, speaking directly to you because of that connection. But the fact is that everybody has so many of those. And so when you think about what are the chances that I could have that kind of a connection,
What do you mean when you say so
I'm
many?
pretty sure I'm not done talking. Jack. When you ask, what are the chances that something like that can happen? I'd say that they're pretty high.
Well, I want to go back to what you said, and I'm confused because you said everybody has so many of those. What do you mean when you say that? I don't really, because not everyone's a theist. A lot of people don't believe in God.
Well, what I mean is that there are so many words that could signify that a sign is reaching out to you. For example, for me, my dad used to call me little bird. So anything that has to do with a bird, which there's all kinds of bird stuff out there. Anything that has to do with the color pink, because that's my favorite color. You know, there's so many things about me that make me who I am. And so I can understand how it can feel like when those words are being used, that it's trying to signify something, it's trying to tell me something. But I could also understand how that's just a human desire to want to feel like you belong, to want to feel like you belong here.
I agree.
So now that being said, and you having said yourself that we can never have sufficient evidence to believe this stuff, why are we going to say that because coincidences like that happen, that obviously a God exists? Because we don't find that convincing at all.
That's a great response, and I expected you to say something like that. But here's how I would respond to that. I want to kind of reframe it a little bit, because I feel like science is great at looking at our, reality as far as the three dimensions of space and one dimension of time that we can perceive. And it's a really good tool for that, but I don't think it's a great tool for asking the why kind of questions. It's great at asking the how questions of how does this work? How does that work?
What about the what questions?
Like, is there a God? Or why is the universe, or whatever?
What about the what questions,
Jack? Never solve that. What do you mean, what questions? What type of
what exists?
Well, the word exists, if you just ask someone the question, what exists, that's a really hard question. Like, the shorter a question like that, like, we know we exist. I think we can all agree that existence is real, right? Like, we're talking.
So that's the thing. This is a big conversation, actually, in the atheist community. This is a very big topic on what is real, what exists, what is true. Because when we really, really dig down deep, it gets really confusing. But that's the thing, is that it just gets more confusing. We don't find more answers yet.
We find more questions. Every time we answer a question in the scientific community, we open up 15 more questions.
Right.
It's an interesting theory. I study the history of science, and every time you learn something new in the scientific community, you open up 15 more questions. So actually, over time, the percentage of questions we know the answer to goes down.
I would agree with that.
Questions open up every time we solve the problem. And that's a problem with atheism, in my opinion. My humble opinion.
Jack, one sec. Because I don't understand how you're not seeing what I think both Jenna and I see here, which is you're saying there are so many questions that are unanswered that it's unreasonable to say that we know answers to questions, but then simultaneously you're saying, here's something that we can't, there's really no way for us to empirically prove, yet I believe it. And you're acting as the worthy, unreasonable ones when we're saying, yeah, there's all of these unanswered questions that we don't have the answers to. And you're saying, well, there's this one thing that we really can't even prove whether or not it is or isn't true, but I believe it anyway, but acting as though that's the reasonable version. You see?
That's a very fair response. I appreciate that you said that, Shannon, because I think it can be very confusing when I talk to people because I use a lot of terms in different ways. But what I'm trying to say at its core, if I had to sum it up in one sentence, is that believing in God is something I do out of more of a belief in my heart, not in my head. Like there's some things I believe in my head, like, you know, math or science or whatever.
Does that mean?
I believe. Like
everything you believe is in your head, Jack.
My head.
You're just saying you have an emotional connection to it. That's in your head too.
Well, no, it's interesting because your gut bacteria contribute to your cognition, as does aspects of your heart function.
So does this gut bacteria only apply when we're trying to investigate a God belief?
But what I'm saying is this, right? So sometimes you got to think with your head, sometimes you think with your heart, sometimes you think with your gut. So what
I don't know.
is this? It's a funny.
All of it's in your head. That's nonsense to me.
You're gonna have to. So Shannon's got a psychology degree. She's studied. Hold on, Jack. You have on the line a woman who has actually studied the human brain. Okay, have you actually studied the human brain?
I have bipolar disorder, so
it doesn't tell me anything that you've studied.
Well, I was sent to the hospital 6 times, and I've seen the craziest aspects of human behavior.
Oh my God. Do you think that because you've been to the hospital 6 times that you understand how the human brain works?
Of course not. I can't even begin to fathom the depths of the human brain.
So that is my point. You can't even fathom the depths of the human brain. And here we have somebody who can help you understand the depths of the human brain.
I would love
somebody who can help you understand why we don't actually think with our gut and our heart. We actually think with our brain. Do you have any questions for Shannon?
Well, I have a question for Shannon. If you were to decide whether you want to marry someone, a man or a woman, I don't know you very well.
Could be either. Now you know. Go ahead.
I'm not going to make assumptions, but anyway, so
I just declared it, so no need.
You're the day before, right? The day before, are you going to run through a mental checklist of all of the things and say yes, no, and then if it sums up more than 50%, you marry them, or are you going to make a more intuitive choice? Now, I know it's metaphorical, right?
Whoa. Hold on. You asked your question, and now she's going to answer it.
I'll let her.
No, Jack. Okay, Jack, I will mute you.
She'll do it, Jack. She's not messing around.
You asked the question, and now you give her time to answer.
Okay, I'll shut up.
Thank you.
Okay, so Jack, your question essentially boils down to, if I'm understanding it, when you're in a highly emotional situation, are you going to think emotionally or logically or some combination of the two? That's what the question seems to be trying to tie itself into, right? So I'm getting married. What factors into my decision about getting married? Now, the answer is going to be different. Like if you look at some research about like people who get married, like first and second marriages, the factors that determine what their decision-making process is going into marriage changes. And the reason it changes is because of experience. And once people have experience, they understand that just relying solely on emotions to make decisions isn't always the best idea, because it lands them in outcomes that they wouldn't have seen otherwise because they weren't carefully considering, and that result in them not having aspects of their lives being happy, right? So the answer to that question is, I've already been married once, and I engaged in that marriage probably more emotionally than logically. And if I were to go into a marriage again, likely because of the progression of my cognitive understanding of what the outcomes are going to be resulting of that marriage, I would do a more careful tabulation of the compatibility between myself and the other person, and engage in that differently. So what that would highlight for me, I think, is actually the opposite of what I think you're attempting to prove here. What you're attempting to prove here is that we make emotional decisions that result in happiness, but that's not always the case. Making emotional decisions is actually solely emotional decisions. Sometimes feels right because it feels being the operative term, feels a certain kind of way. So we think that good feeling that we have at the moment somehow is reflective of the accuracy of our decisions or like the efficacy of them and the long-term viability for our lives. But your question itself highlights that that's not necessarily the case. So if your argument is that making emotional choices is something that we do and the outcomes of it are something that we should always see as, valuable or good, then my answers to your question kind of defeat that. Really, because you need to have you can't ignore your emotions. You have a limbic system. There's not really much you can do about it. So you're going to have emotions, but just having emotions doesn't mean that you should only go off of emotions. The more you understand about how emotions operate and understand neuroanatomy and cognitive function, the more you realize that emotions can kind of overwhelm logical decisions that force you into a position where you're actually at a detriment instead of being in a better position because you relied on emotions instead of logic. Does that help answer your question?
Well, I think the way you looked at it sounded, and you know what? You were on point, and I basically agreed with everything. The point I was making, though, was that, like let's say, there's a lot of hold on, instances, right, of people leaving.
I'm sorry. Are you saying that you have a different way to prove that we think with something other than our brain?
Well, what I'm saying, though, is science, and they've been researching this a lot, is that are the flora in our gut, right? Actually,
nociceptors, Jack. Jack, the flora in your gut, I know what studies you're talking about. What you're talking about right now is nociceptors. So there's neurons that are in your body. If you're going to keep talking about this, I think you should understand it a little bit better because there's something called a blood-brain barrier, right? Yeah. So you're like the stuff that's in your body, there's a blood-brain barrier that prevents it essentially from getting into your brain. So your gut flora, as you refer to it, or fauna, like what happens in your gut bacteria, which they are starting to look at, and sometimes in relation to autism spectrum disorder, doesn't actually somehow get into your brain. That's not how it works. But what you do have in your body are neurons called nociceptors. Nociceptors are periphery neurons. Those are neurons that exist in your skin, in your stomach, in your body. They send sensations through your spinal column all the way up through your reticular formation and into your brain. Most of it is something that we're not consciously aware of. 80% of nociceptor transmissions that go up the spinal column terminate at the reticular formation. Otherwise, all we'd feel all day is our clothes touching our body, and it would drive us insane, right? So gut bacteria can have an effect on nociceptors that line the walls of the stomach, as well as nociceptors, things like C fibers and like short twitch fibers that transmit into the back of the spinal column and then go up to your brain in order to give you messages. Now, if you have some sort of like a disordered subcognition, because this is something that happens subconsciously in and around the reticular formation, there is a chance that those nociceptor messages that are essentially just saying, yes, this is still happening, yes, this is still happening, that usually don't make it to your consciousness, can make it through to your consciousness due to a deficiency. That's not the regular way that things happen, but it does happen sometimes if there's a deficiency. And because these are the types of signals that aren't supposed to go to your brain, really, for conscious processing, they're supposed to be in the cerebral structures of your brain for your autonomic processing. If one of them bleeds through into your actual cortical areas, it can cause like diffused and difficult cognition because it's not really something that's necessarily supposed to be there. Now, if you read through the studies, that's what you're probably looking at. It's not it's not bacteria in your system having a specific effect. It's that those types of nociceptors that read that the gut bacteria is taking place or have the sensation of gut bacteria in your stomach don't terminate at the reticular formation like they usually do and get confused. So that's why. Do you understand the science a little bit better now? And will you stop just saying, please, that gut bacteria makes you think different things?
Because clearly you've done your research, and if we were to debate psychology, I would lose. So
I studied neuroscience.
So that is why it is better, in my opinion, to start asking questions when you have at least somebody who can help you. So my question for you now is, do you still believe that we think with something other than our brain?
I think that consciousness, and you use the word consciousness, which was about what I was going to mention.
No, I said
I believe
think.
that consciousness.
I did.
Oh, you did?
Okay. Thinking consciousness, it's okay. Well, our awareness, our consciousness, our thinking process, I think that the brain functions as a form of receiver of consciousness rather than creator of consciousness. That's where I disagree with most atheists.
Why? Why do you think that? Based on what? Based on what understanding about how, like, based on what? Okay, so if I said to you that, for example, if the brain is receiving consciousness, that means that it's a medium that something is being transmitted to, right? 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 That's what it would have to mean, right? Like something outside of us is transmitting to our brain. Okay, so now explain to me.
If I'm mispronouncing it, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're right. So I need you to explain to me then, if your brain is just a receiver for messages, for signals that happen outside, how it is that I can augment. Okay, so how it is that I can augment those neural transmissions through neural pharmacology, how I can like do brain surgeries that will actually change the constitution of your sense of self. And also, like, even if you go down to the cellular level, every neuron that fires in your brain is firing because there's a concentration of sodium and potassium ions on either side of a cell membrane. And inside those cell membranes of the neurons that are giving the neurotransmitters off is a mitochondria, and that mitochondria produces a chemical called ATP, and that ATP opens the channels between the outside and inside of that cell membrane so that those sodium and potassium ions can travel back and forth. And only when they get to the point that there is a disparate amount on one side or the other does the electrical impulse required to create that neuronal action potential to fire that neuron to send you the message so that we can even have this conversation take place. So I would like you to tell me how something outside of your brain can change the amount of sodium and potassium ions on either side of a cell membrane in your brain in order to receive the messages. Does it use little neurotransmitter tweeters?
An electromagnetic field, right?
It's not creating an electromagnetic field, it's creating an action potential.
We send electrical impulses from our brain down our spine through our nervous system, right?
Kind of. Yes.
Okay. So what I'm saying is anytime you send electricity in a specific direction. So when I learned about electricity and magnets, the way they taught us was when you move magnets around a wire, you create electricity. And if you want to use a motor, you basically send electricity and can create motion. But anyway, so electricity is a force that permeates the universe, right? So I believe that consciousness is also a type of force, right?
You didn't answer my question though. You shifted off. You shifted off. You're saying that there's something that exists outside of us that is us, and that our brain is just the receiver for that, right? Well, the brain is just the receiver.
I believe that.
Okay, that's what you initially said.
Well, I believe that. So what I'm trying to say is that I believe God is essentially the source of all consciousness.
Okay, hold on, Jack. Hold on, really quick. I'm so sorry. Shannon just explained a whole bunch to you about how the brain works and the functions and she's studied. So that's the evidence that we have there. She studied this, right? Can you explain a God in any kind of a similar fashion? Can you give us information the way that she did?
Because I don't have a degree in psychology and I'm not nearly as educated as her.
So do you think that you needed a degree in psychology to believe in a God?
No, I don't. I actually think that a lot of times people, it's interesting because a lot of scientists believe in God. And
well, not a lot, but that's not the point. That's a completely separate argument.
Well, a fair number.
No, Jack, that's a separate argument.
He's a deist.
Well, we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about why you believe there is a God, even though you can't explain it.
Well, I took shrooms about a month ago. So
you think because you took shrooms, that's evidence for a God?
No, shrooms isn't the evidence for God.
Do you have any? Shannon has seen evidence of a brain. I've seen evidence of a brain. We know brains exist. She's studied how they function. She's just explained a bunch to you. Do you have anything like that for a God?
Anything like what?
Like the evidence that we just discussed.
Like, can I point you to a textbook that proves that God exists? No.
No, I'm saying, can you describe to me in your own words what a God is?
This is my definition of God: the source of all consciousness, the creation of everything in the universe, and essentially the purpose of life.
What is he made of?
After I had this experience.
What is he made of?
Well, God is essentially everything. And so
wait. So then why hold on. If God is everything, then why not just use the word everything? I can use the word everything as a placeholder for God.
No.
So why?
So let me explain what I mean. So I can explain if you'd like.
Please.
It'd be neat.
Okay. So what is something that a God, if God is omniscient and knows all things, what is that God unable to do?
I don't know what a God is yet.
Experience surprise. Okay, well,
I still don't know what a God is.
Theorize,
because you said it's everything. So what can everything do? Well, everything can do a lot. Everything can do anything.
You just literally said, if God can do literally anything, is there anything he can't do? I mean, the answer to that question is, if you define a God as someone who can do anything, then obviously not. You can't define things into truth and then act like that's a mic drop, which is what you just did. You just said, well, if God can do everything, then he can do everything. So there. I mean, fine.
Do you hear yourself, Jack? Do you hear yourself?
Or novelty.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm at my wit's end because we're every time I feel like we're just about to get to something, it seems like the conversation shifts and we go to like something completely unrelated. Okay, I'm uncomfortable talking about this anymore because we've hit a wall. So now let's talk about this instead. And we could do that ad infinitum, and I don't want to. So I'm going to bid you adieu and thank you very much. I enjoyed this conversation. I love any opportunity I have to talk about brains, and it's not my turn anymore. It's your turn now.
Thank you.